Hello friends, welcome back to Heartscapes, where we're learning the system of Reiki and growing gardens to be rooted, to be spacious, to be connected, and to remember ourselves. My name is Michaela and welcome back to the garden. This video is part 2 of a 2-part video series just giving you a tour of the infrastructure projects that we built in our garden this past fall and winter to set us up for great success in this growing season. Part 1 was posted last week. If you haven't checked it out yet, I'll put the link down below. You can get caught up. I didn't intend this to be a 2-part series, but the first one started to run a little long, and then my camera battery died, and I lost the light, and anyway, here we are, actually a couple of weeks later, between the 2 filmings. Took me a little while to turn back around to it. But I wanted to be sure to complete this tour because some of the projects that I feel the most excited about and I'm the most proud of are up here in the front garden. In part 1, we looked at my backyard garden and looked at some beehive projects, some chicken projects, and some garden bed projects. And up here in the front patio garden and out in the front yard, we did some more, I think, certainly structurally valuable infrastructure, but really with a mind towards beauty and towards space making. These are really important aspects for me of gardening, of creating spaces that really call us in, that invite people to sit a while, to drop into a relaxed space, perhaps even a meditative space, and to really observe carefully the life around us and possibly also the life within us as well. And so creating spaces in the garden that are beautiful, that are comfortable, and that really bring us inside the garden as if we were a part of it, because of course we are, is really important to me. And so that's a bit of what we were up to this past fall and winter up here in the front garden. So I'm excited to share that with you. And let's just get started with an overview of this space. So as I mentioned in the first video, I live in a kind of semi-urban suburban area in a rural county in Central California. And for many, many years, the 10 years I've lived here and the 15 years that I lived in the Bay Area, I've grown gardens and tried to figure out what it means to live a sustainable life in the middle of a city. And so as a result, just about every space on this property is crammed with plants or animals or infrastructure of some sort or another. It's always growing, it's always expanding. And so this patio where we are right now was just a blank slate when I started, and we'll see what has arisen since then. But first, I'm just going to take you out to the driveway where I can just kind of show you an overview of this space. All right, so I'm here at the front door, and we're just going to take a look at this whole space as an overview. So let me turn you around. So walking down the driveway, we've got the front yard area here. We'll circle back around to this because the last project we're going to look at is hiding, lurking behind those trees over there. But you can see just kind of an average sized front yard there. And then a bit of a fence, this garden bed with roses, a little archway into the patio space. And so this space I designed really intentionally to be kind of a meditation space. It's right off of my bedroom. So even though it's right by the front door, it's also, in a certain way, it feels like a private space. And to enhance that, I've grown passion flower vines along this fence that really kind of walls it in, the roses and some asters are filling out this side to kind of wall that side off. And then there's these 2 garden beds, raised beds, just right on the concrete here that makes up the main garden in this space. And then another bed against the wall there. We're going to take a closer look at that one. And then this is my sit-in bench, currently filled with bags of seeds that I'm processing. It's that time of year. So it's a bit of a mess on my sit-in bench. And then just a couple of nice potted plants here to begin with. So this is the overall space. And the first project that I got busy with last fall was this corner bed right here. So the two beds that we looked at coming in with the kind of more reddish wood, those I purchased from a local person who builds them, does a great job. But I wanted a corner bed to match so that I could grow some tomatoes along this fence. And with materials prices being what they've been the last couple of years, buying one already made was pretty prohibitive. And I thought, you know what? Got time on my hands. I bet I could make that. And I didn't do a terrible job. You really get into it. There's really not a square angle on it. There's a lot of wonky places, but it's definitely sturdy. It's doing the job. It's beautiful in its own way. I was able to paint it the color of the house trim. And then added some trellising along the wall there, and you can see the passion flower vines are now growing along the sides of this bed, and so it'll kind of end up consumed with the passion flower vines. A word about passion flower vines. They will attempt to take over the world if you let them get established in your garden. So I'm kind of constantly pulling up their little runners from different places, but that's okay because I plant them and make more plants to trade with my neighbors. So that project was completed in the fall, installed just in time to really do some soil building over the winter so that it would be ready to house some plants this spring and summer. A note about these tomatoes, these particular varieties are called silver fir tree, and these ones are called premise. And I received the seeds for these from Seed Savers Exchange. They do a kind of citizen science project each year where they have people trial different varieties that they're considering selling and give them a lot of feedback on it. And so I'm participating this year in their dwarf tomato trial, and I'm enjoying it very much. So if that's something you're interested in, I'll put the link to that project down below. So let's see. And just giving you one more shot of that corner garden bed. It's working pretty well. All right, let's take a look at project number 2. So just to orient you, if we swing to the left from the corner bed that we just looked at, across the center, you see that metal bed there against the wall. So that bed is made by a company called Vigo. Not affiliated. They build these garden beds, raised garden beds in all kinds of different sizes and configurations. They're customizable to a certain extent, different heights. I decided to go with the deepest one, partly to match the ones that were already here, and also because I use the hugelkultur method of garden bed building, which is a permaculture method that begins with logs on the bottom layer, adds different sorts of organic materials in a second layer, and then eventually gets to planting soil on the top. So you need quite a bit of space. So these beds are deep enough for that. I love it. It's really working well. It's very sturdy. It happens to match the color of my house perfectly, which was great. The one thing I will say, if you're considering getting these beds, they take forever. Approximately 75 years to build because of all of those screws. So you can see it's made of panels, and there's about 1 million screws stitching together each of the panels. It makes them very, very sturdy, but it took forever. So a good project to get a couple of friends to help you with. Makes a very tedious job go quite a bit quicker. So as you can see, we've got a row of columbine flowers here that are going to seed. They're just about done with their springtime shenanigans. This bed gets mostly shade, so the front of it is in the sun right now, but the back climbing vines are in the shade, and it pretty much stays in the shade most of the day. So I needed shade-loving plants for that space. The plants that are growing up on that trellis, so you can see I built the trellis there. It goes up and is attached to the beams in the roof up there, and then just has a couple of hog panels sandwiched in between. relatively easy build. And the plants growing on it are California pipevine. California pipevine is a really beautiful plant. It makes a really unusual flower that basically looks like a little fabric sack hanging down, like a little pitcher. So I think it's also sometimes called pitcher plant. And it emits a very faint rotting meat smell because its pollinator is flies, not bees. So I definitely discussed that issue with the gardener that I bought it from. Is my garden gonna smell like rotting meat when this is in flower? And he assured me that it will not, that it's very subtle, detectable only to flies. So we shall see. As you can see, they're pretty young. I planted them in the late winter and they are just really kind of getting their legs under them. I don't necessarily anticipate they'll flower this year, but really want to just help them get established so that they can be here in abundance next year. And the coolest thing about California pipevine is that it's the host plant to my very favorite butterfly, the blue swallowtail. So I very much look forward to having that friend in the garden. The passion flower vines behind me, the aforementioned plants that will try to take over the world, they are the host plant to a really beautiful orange butterfly whose name I always forget. It's kind of an odd, long name. Maybe I'll put it down in the show notes. But it's a beautiful orange butterfly with some patterning on the wings. And I'm just imagining the orange and the blue butterflies just floating through this space when they're both established. And that just delights me. And that is more or less the reason that I put that bed in. I really wanted to put in pipevine, and that was the perfect spot. So far, it's working out pretty good. All right, let's move on to project number 3. So for project number 3, we're now standing right next to the bed and trellis that we just looked at. It's here at my left. And this is the door to my bedroom. So this is my view from in the morning when I come out with my coffee. And so in front of me here are those 2 kind of redwood garden beds that we looked at in the beginning, the ones that I purchased. And they take up pretty much the entire center of this little patio. And there's a little walkway between them. And when I first put them in, I imagined having an arched trellis between the 2 beds in that little tiny walkway. And for the first couple of years, I put in quite possibly the most half-assed version of this plan that there is. Just a couple of very rusty T-posts in the corners of each bed with just an arch of very cheap garden wire that arched between the 2. It did the job. The plants grew on them, but they were very ugly. And so to be perfectly honest, I wasn't entirely mad about it when a very large branch fell on that garden bed trellis in the midst of a storm a couple of years ago. We had a very large tree in the front yard that was not doing well. A lot of the ash trees that are in this neighborhood are diseased and have been being taken out by the city one by one. And ours was in bad shape. And on that particular stormy night, it let rip one of the largest branches. It crushed that very janky trellis. It almost went through my bedroom window, and I called the city immediately and said, please come get this tree out of here. I miss it. It was beautiful. It was filled with birds all the time, but it really was becoming a menace. Anyway, I'm sidetracking myself. Let's get back on task. So when that happened, that really kind of gave me the impetus to rebuild this properly and to make it look like what I had in my imagination when I thought about there being a trellis here, and to build something that really worked with the rest of what we have going on here and would again invoke that sense of beauty and peace. And so I rebuilt it with redwood, and I'm happy to show it to you. So here is the new trellis. We can see the little gap, the little walkway there. The brick flooring that I put in when I originally put in these beds. And then there, in between the two beds, we have this, I guess it's more of an arbor than a trellis or some kind of combination. But as you can see, it's made of redwood 2x4s, this really beautiful iron hardware to hold everything together. It is currently absolutely covered with the aforementioned passion flowers, a couple of tomato plants on each side, and some really sweet little friends that have started to take up residence in this space. Including this little bluebird that my daughter made in kindergarten. She's about to turn 13, so it feels kind of nice to have her little artwork in here. And this little friend down here. So it's a very narrow space, so it needed something really sturdy, but also compact. So I'm using this plastic-coated garden wire. The wire itself is fairly flimsy, but it's really well secured to the trellis, so it's working really well. And then I went ahead and extended it over the walkway on the other side just to create this little shady space. We live in a very hot region, and in the midst of summer, in the midst of the day, it gets very hot. So just having this little shady spot to duck into in the heat of the day has been really, really lovely. So a relatively simple project, but one that I took my time with because, while it was simple, it's also the sort of thing that requires a lot of straight edges and square corners. And let's just be honest, I'm not the most organized square corner straight line kind of person. And so I really needed to pay attention. I really needed to take my time and use my tools well so that I could put something together that felt right. There's a way in which we want to hold a space of both firm and flexible in life, generally, and in the projects that we do. This is a principle that I often teach to in my Reiki classes and in sessions with people, that we want to give ourselves enough structure that we feel safe and that we have a firm foundation, that we feel stable, and enough flexibility that we make room to be alive. We make room for things to move and to change and to have new ideas and to shift and to pivot and to make space for the unexpected and for the mysterious. And I approach projects that way as well. Some projects, there's more flexibility available. Others, we need more structure, more firmness. This was definitely one that I leaned into structure and into containment in a way that I'm honestly not really used to. And, when I made that corner garden bed that we looked at earlier, and as I said, there just isn't a perfectly square corner in the whole thing. There's a lot of, panels that overlap each other in weird ways that don't come together quite right. It functions. It's sound. It's sturdy. It works perfectly well. It looks nice from afar. But I didn't want that level of looseness in this project. I wanted this to have that calm and stability and peace that can come from good architecture, honestly. And as I'm standing here looking at it, there's still wonky places and places where things don't quite overlap exactly right. And that's okay, because that's me, right? That's just my capacity, my abilities, my aesthetic, just peeking through. But I am really proud of how this came together, the time that I took to do it. I took time to get the materials I wanted, which were much more expensive. I wanted to use redwood instead of pressure treated wood. I wanted to use these, really nice hardware pieces rather than a more inexpensive version. And it took time to kind of save up money and buy those pieces bit by bit. But this is why we do projects like this in the winter. when there's not a whole lot else going on. You know, we do some gardening over the winter. We're lucky enough to have a mild enough climate for that, but it's certainly not the kind of intensity that you have in the spring and summer. So I was able to just really take the whole winter to put this together and make it the way that I wanted it. And I'm really happy with it. All right. Thanks for letting me share that with you. We have one more project to look at, and truly, it's saving the best for last. I mentioned that. I kind of foreshadowed that in part one. We actually started in the middle of this project, and we're going to circle back around to it. And this one really takes the exact opposite approach to what I just described in terms of the firm and flexible relationship. This one, I leaned more into structure, into firmness, into square angles and straight lines. This other one is all flexibility and flow. That's not true. There's plenty of structure. It's built soundly, it's solid, but aesthetically, it's all about flow. Let's go take a look. So here we are again in the front yard. This front yard for years and years and years was an absolute embarrassment. I just didn't know what to do with it. I let the weeds overgrow it. It was truly just an eyesore and an embarrassment for many, many years. And last year I was like, enough is enough. This is the front of the house. This is the first thing people see when they come to our space. My studio is here in the house, so it's also the first thing people see when they come to my business. I need it to be beautiful. I needed to have that same feeling of welcome, of beauty, of calm. And so last year, that was a priority, and I'm really happy with how it's shaping up. There's a lot more to do out here. Hopefully I'll get to share those projects with you. There's a little foreshadowing there. There's obviously something quite in the middle going on right there. I'll share that project with you in another video. But for now, we're going to head down this path in this direction towards those elderberry trees. So the first thing that I did about wrangling this space into something beautiful was to plant 2 elderberry trees over here on the side, kind of out of the way. I was like, that's not too much commitment. I can make that happen. So we have one here and one there. This one here I bought from a local nursery as a cultivated plant. That one there was grown from a cutting from a wild plant. We have many elderberries that grow naturally in the creekways around my home. It was really interesting seeing the difference in the growth patterns of these 2 trees. But that is perhaps a story for another day. If we continue on, one of the things that I realized right away was that there was this space in between the 2 where I used to have a little chair. Actually, there used to be a tree stump there that I would sit on. It was my first sitting spot in the garden. And that tree stump rotted out and the chair was ugly. So I thought, wouldn't it be nice if there was a bench between these 2 trees? Perhaps a covered bench where the trees could grow over it and then create an enclosed space. And that is what we did this past winter. You can see it's barely visible here. The trees have done such a good job growing over it. It truly hides here, this secret garden, this secret treasure place. But if we come inside, you can see that there is a full open space inside these 2 trees. The back is almost filled in there. We'll pull a few more of those branches around to fill in those gaps between our secret bench and the neighborhood. As you can see, it's made of driftwood, of logs and branches of different types. These are branches that me and my roommate have collected from different adventures. This is some manzanita from up in the Sierras where I go mushroom foraging. These are some branches found at our local creek, so very local to us. There are branches from trees that we removed from this property. And then there's this beautiful cedar bench seat that is shaped to be soft and smooth and rounded. My roommate does a process called shosugiban, which is a Japanese process of burning wood and then coating it in oil and wax to protect it and make it beautiful. The beehive I showed you in the last video has this process done. And it's just this amazing space. He created these shelves here to hold a nice beverage and also some beautiful altar space. It is continuing to evolve, continuing to be decorated. I have a little stained glass piece I'm going to hang in that corner to catch the light. But it is just so nice in here. It's noticeably cooler in here than the rest of the outside. Let's see some elderberries there that are just about ready to harvest. And then from this sit-in spot, I can look out at the rest of the garden and the neighborhood, the people who walk their dogs every day. I've got some tomato trellises here. There's a little in-ground garden bed right here that I'm going to keep working on. That was new this year, so it's still getting established. Further out towards the edge of the property there, I don't know if you can see, but there's a potato patch that wraps around the front corner. This feral pomegranate tree that grew from the squirrels planting it. Not quite sure if I'm going to keep that yet. I don't think the fruits are very edible, but it is beautiful. And this lovely little space. Okay, so I've now placed you on that shelf that I showed you earlier. Perfect spot for a camera. So I have to say the only credit I can really take for this project is the original idea. My roommate Leaf is a hobby carpenter and a really brilliant artist and absolutely leans into just full on leans into the flexible and the fluid and the creative, and he really took his time with this project. In fact, he employed what we decided needed a name, and I actually made up a word to describe this process, which is Pauliminocht. And I'll put the etymology of that word down in the description down below, but basically what it means is that the process of taking your time with a project, of not forcing your will onto the materials of your project, but allowing time for those materials to speak to you, to kind of reveal their own true nature, their own form over time, rather than, starting with your own fixed, rigid vision of what a project needs to be and then forcing the materials to fit into that vision. It's much more of a collaboration with your materials. And it's particularly appropriate when your materials are, nature, right? Each one of these branches, logs, pieces of wood is completely different and has its own shape and form and color. And he really had to take his time letting them come into form. And again, firm and flexible. There was nothing firm about the timeline of this project. I had imagined it done much, much sooner than it was. Luckily, it was completed by the spring, so we've been able to enjoy it quite a bit. We kind of had a timetable of when these elderberry trees really started to take off. They needed this structure in place so that we could tie them on, and the branches of the elderberries are woven into the structure. So as they were growing, he was building the structure and weaving the two together. And it really, he just would sit with these materials, sit with all of the logs we'd gathered, try different configurations of them, change ideas that he had for what it would look like. And it's a particular strategy that requires us to remain somewhat unattached to our precious ideas for something. And this is, so often, I bring things back around to what we learn and teach inside of our Reiki space, our classes, our practice, our work with clients, because, these are principles that show up in these spiritual spaces, spiritual principles that are absolutely important and valuable and practical for our daily life. So the idea of non-attachment, of remaining unattached to the things that we might otherwise cling to and see as so precious that we can't change them or let them go. And so much suffering from the perspective of the Buddhist traditions that underlie the system of Reiki and other traditions as well. So much suffering is caused from that experience of gripping on, of being so attached to our identity, to the things that we want, to the way we want things to be. And there's a paradoxical freedom that comes from letting go of some of those attachments and allowing life to unfold and allowing life to be what it is. That's not to say we give up control of our life and let ourselves be flung into chaos, not at all. But it's about collaborating with life, about being present to what is actually true in a given moment and then responding appropriately to that, rather than responding to our idea of what we wish were true or what we believe is true without the evidence. And watching my housemate Leaf build this bench was a beautiful, both practical and artistic, lived demonstration of that principle. I watched him let go of idea after idea after idea because the materials that we had would not allow for those ideas to fully express themselves. Or actually, more often, in order to make these materials fit what his original ideas were, he would have to change fundamental aspects of them, cut them in ways that eliminated a particularly elegant curve, for example, or that, used a less beautiful piece of wood over a more beautiful piece of wood because the shape was more appropriate. Things like that. He could tell you a lot more about those kinds of decisions. But by spending time with it, eventually it revealed its true form, its true self, its true nature, and it's so much better than either of us had even imagined. And in that, he learned to be responsive, right? And to be creative about what, how to put it together. But this has become a favorite spot for us. Both Leaf and I run our businesses out of my studio, which is upstairs. Most of my videos take place up in the studio. And he's a counselor with Wildish Work Counseling. I will put his link down below. He's a brilliant counselor. So he sees clients here. And this space, this sitting space, this community space has become an important one for both of us. We bring clients here, and it really opens something up when we are when we're doing this kind of work of remembering ourselves, of coming into states of wholeness, of letting go of trauma and pain. To do that kind of work literally enveloped by life, just absolutely held in this beautiful green womb, this beautiful weaving together of a human-built space and a natural space. It really, in a sense, to me, is representative of everything that we're trying to do here. My neighbor is doing some construction work, so there's going to be a little bit of power tool sounds here at the very end of the video. Such is life on an urban homestead. So I think that's what I wanted to share. I think we're at the end here. I just really wanted to end in this space for all the reasons that I've just shared. It's really become a special space, and I'm really happy to be able to introduce it to you. If you're local to me and like to come sit in this little sit-in space, I invite you to reach out. I'd love to host you here. And for those of you friends in the virtual space, I'm really glad that I was able to bring you into my space in this way. And I hope that something of what I've shared in these garden tours has inspired you, has touched you, has tickled you in some way. I will continue sharing these spaces, but more so over in the second channel that I have recently dared to launch, which is going to be called Heartscape's Urban Homestead. I've decided to move most of my gardening content over to that space so people who just want gardening content can find it more easily. And so I'll put a link to that channel down below. I'd really appreciate your support over there. Give me a subscribe. Join me over there for more garden fun, more urban homesteading adventures. I appreciate your support. And yeah, I think that's what I came here to say today. So as you go from this place, hopefully bringing some inspiration with you, may you be deeply provisioned for your day. Thanks so much for joining me on this tour. Until next time, I love you. Bye.